Howdy y'all, today we're looking at Ripperdactyl Riders. I kind of wanted, I've been putting this video off a little bit because I loved Ripperdactyl Riders in the last Battle Tome. I had 18, I think, and loved SHADOWSTRIKE. That was my list. I loved how flexible it was, how you could basically point to an enemy unit and take it off turn one. And that was... I love that strategy. That was great. It was like a scalpel. They weren't going to stick around, but they were a huge threat, made your opponent deploy differently at the beginning of the game. It's gone now. Let's just go ahead and put that out there. Ripperdactyls are not what they used to be. Remember these little guys here? Bloat Toads? They used to be feared. These little guys used to be scary. They would put fear in your opponents. Where are you going to put the Bloat Toad down? Not anymore. So I kind of wanted to do a comparison between Ripperdactyls and Pterodons, but as I started getting into it, I'm going to split it up. We're going to do Ripperdactyls today, Pterodons tomorrow. I just wanted to make sure and devote a few minutes to wallow in the misery of the new Ripperdactyl Riders. All right, so let's get into it. Let's see what they look like now. So Ripperdactyl Riders, 3 wounds each, 12-inch move, 5-up save. All that's kind of looking the same. They've lost their shields that the skinks had, so they don't ignore -1 rend anymore. So basically, their save got 1 worse if you have rend. 5 bravery base, and so that really hurts, especially when your standard unit of these guys is 6. You can bring them in 3s, but in the previous Battle Tome, you'd always bring them in 6. Sometimes if you wanted to get a little crazy, go a little bit more. So that kind of hurts on their bravery. Now, if you lose 1, there's a good chance you're going to lose another one via Battle Shock. They have basically 4 attacks now. 1 War Spear, 4s and 4s, no rend, 1 damage. And Jaws, 3 attacks, 4s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage. You do get an extra attack on the spear for the alpha. And you do still have a Bloat Toad. It's used a little bit differently now. Now, at the start of your combat phase, you set up 1 Bloat Toad marker next to 1 enemy unit. If you do so, you can re-roll hit rolls for attacks made by the tearing jaws by friendly Ripperdactyl units that are wholly within 6 inches of that enemy unit. At the end of the combat phase, remove the Bloat Toad. It can't be used again. So here, it's a little bit easier to use because you can put it down at the start of any of the combat phases. Even if you were getting attacked, you could throw them down. But there's a couple things that really hurt here. It's only affecting 1 unit, and it has to be wholly within... your units have to be wholly within 6 inches of that unit. So if by some chance you're putting that Bloat Toad in between 2 units, which I used to do a lot, and attack with all 6 of them, you've got to make sure that your Ripperdactyls are within 6 inches of the enemy unit you choose, so you get the reroll hits. So you've got to be wary of where you put that Bloat Toad at, and then you've got to make sure your Ripperdactyls stay within 6 inches of whatever unit you've decided. Designer's note, if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with Tearing Jaws is 6, the attack scores 2 on the target instead of 1. Make a wound and save roll for each hit. So we've got the exploding hits, kind of like it used to be, but not nearly as good. So it does, on an unmodified 6, you'll get an extra attack. So on the surface, it's not really all that good. In fact, when these came out, I'm going to be honest, I sold all my Ripperdactyls. I saw that they had changed. I saw the battalion, and I was like, nah, I'm out. Here's what a unit of 3, based on a War Scroll with reroll hits and exploding 6s, we can expect an amazing 3 damage versus a 4-up save. That's their average damage. So not good. Not at all what they used to do. So in SHADOWSTRIKE, in the old book, I would take 6 and... without any other support, them just dropping down in that battalion, I was, on average, creating about 50 saves, no rend, into an enemy unit. And so now we're talking about making on a unit of 6 damage into a 4-up save. Not good. There are some ways to buff that, so let's see what we can do to buff that up. They did give us a new hero, the Ripperdactyl Chief, and basically it's just another Ripperdactyl that you're going to designate as a chief, try to make them stand out somehow. This will make you kind of have to buy odd numbers of Ripperdactyls, so it's going to be kind of interesting how you're going to feel this. But what we're doing here is, and he's just a 5-wound hero, 5-up save. He moves the same as him. He's basically the same thing as a normal Ripperdactyl, just with a couple extra wounds. But his command ability is what makes him nice. So at the start of the combat phase, pick one friendly model with his command ability. Until the end of that phase, add 1 to the attack characteristics of melee weapons used by friendly Ripperdactyl units that are wholly within 18 of that model. And so you're going to add 1 to attacks. So now we had 4 base attacks on Ripperdactyls, so we're going to go up to 6 because we're adding 1 to each of those profiles. So it helps a little bit. Before the FAQ, if you notice his command ability, it doesn't say you can't stack it. And so before the FAQ, which they changed it in, I think Ripperdactyls were a little bit more viable. You could plan for stacking a ton of command points on a unit of Ripperdactyls and basically get them back to what they used to be. Now you'd have to use a whole bunch of command points, but Seraphon has ways to get command points, so that wasn't a big deal. Unfortunately, the FAQ took that away from us. The same unit cannot benefit from this command ability more than once per phase, unfortunately. So now we're just going to add 1 attack for each of those profiles. Ripperdactyl Chief is 80 points, so whether or not you're gonna get your money's worth, or if you could have just taken another unit of Ripperdactyls, that'll be a question to consider. So if we are adding the extra attack for those, our damage goes up a little bit, not a whole lot. It goes up to 4, almost 4.5 on a 4-up save. So not the best. There is some other ways to, because I'm just looking. There's no rend to these guys. Their hit's kind of bad. They explode, so that helps. We're re-rolling it, so that really helps kind of negate that. So how can we get more attacks? If you look at the Stegodon Skink Chief, the Skink Chief on Stegodon, we have another way to add another attack for each of those. So now, using his command ability, you pick 1 friendly unit wholly within 24 of a friendly Stegodon hero with this command ability. Until the end of that phase, add 1 to the attack characteristics of melee weapons used by Skink. Unit can't be used more than once per phase. So basically the same thing. You get to add another 1 attack to that base profile. So instead of having 4, now we've just added another extra 4 onto there. So we're up to 8. So that makes it a little bit better. Once we add that command point, or that command point, we're up to 5. So we're still not adding a whole lot, to be honest. 2 command points into a unit of 3 to add 2 extra damage is not worth it. That's not worth it. Once you get up to 6, you're 6 in a unit, it makes it a little bit more viable, but a unit of 6 is still only doing about 11 damage. So let's look at our battalions. What do they do to our battalions this time? So, SHADOWSTRIKE Temple Host. So we've taken the Skink Priest or Star Priest, 2 units of Skinks or Chameleon Skinks, and 1 unit of Pterodon or Ripperdactyl Riders. Same requirements in both the Coalesced and the Starborne battalions. This one, I honestly think Coalesced is a little bit better for Ripperdactyls. In your hero phase, pick 1 enemy unit that is visible to the Priest or Star Priest from this battalion. Until your next hero phase, add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by units from this battalion that target that unit. So that takes everything that was hitting on 4s, even though we're re-rolling, and gets them down to 3s. And when we have a lot of attacks and you're re-rolling those attacks, that does help quite a bit. The SHADOWSTRIKE one, instead of setting it up, I don't even have to read it. It's basically the old SHADOWSTRIKE rule. You deep strike these 9 inches away. Unfortunately, now it's 9 inches instead of 3. So your charges are statistically going to fail more often than succeed, unless you have some tricks. We have the Constellation, you can add 1 to it. Unfortunately, you're probably going to be out of range of a lot of your buffs. With this SHADOWSTRIKE Star Host, if you're deep striking these guys, you're going to be out of range of a lot of these things. Ripperdactyl is wholly within 18, and he moves 12, so that gives you a 30-inch bubble from where he started that you could be cognizant of and deep strike into that bubble. And the same for the Skink Chief on Stegodon. He's 24 inches, and he has an 8-inch move. So you can work with those bubbles. You got to be careful. You're not going to be able to deep strike anywhere, especially if you still want to be able to use those command points. Fortunately, both of those happen in the combat phase, so you can push both of those onto him if you deep strike in the correct range. Now, you're still probably going to fail your charge, so I don't think the Starborne list is best for Ripperdactyls. I really do think the Coalesced one is best for the Ripperdactyls. Let's look at Coalesce. Coalesce actually gives us an extra jaw attack, too. So if we have an extra jaw attack, just base from Coalesced, then we get an extra set of attacks from the Ripper Chief, an extra set of attacks from the Stegodon Chief. We're +1 to hit from the SHADOWSTRIKE, and I'm going to throw in the Star Priest staff. So he's going to give us 6s to wound our mortals. Now maybe that's cheating, because honestly that kind of buffed up my hits, my damage quite a bit. But he's a great hero. You want him on everything, especially when you have quantity of attacks like the Ripperdactyls have. They're not very good attacks, but we're just fishing for those 6s to wounds. So now we're up to 12 for a unit of 3, and that's actually pretty respectable. I like that. It's only 80 points, and now you're getting 12 damage on a 4-up save. So, of course, if you're looking at a unit of 6, which I would recommend, you're looking at 24 damage for those guys. If you are doing Starborne and you deep strike, you're not going to be able to get any of those buffs in if you deep strike out of range of those bubbles, and you're going to be back down to 3 damage. So I think Coalesced is the option for Ripperdactyls. You are going to struggle a little bit because you don't have teleports, you don't have the deep strike of SHADOWSTRIKE in Coalesced in that battalion, and so you're going to have to worry a lot more about how you set these guys up. They're not going to be an alpha striking unit turn 1 because they only have a movement of 12. And so I don't think these are going to put the fear of anybody into these guys, especially if they know that all they've got to do is just kill this Ripperdactyl Chief and you've lost a lot of punch, or kill the Star Priest and then you've lost a lot of punch. They probably won't be able to kill a Stegodon based on most of the lists that have a Stegodon in them turn 1, but they can easily kill off those support heroes before you ever have a chance to hit them. So I don't, even though I think they are statistically best in Coalesced, they may not do all that well for you in Coalesced, especially not how they used to. So let's look at let's go over to Tabletop Simulator and see how they would do on the board. See if we can make them work. All right, so I've got two deployments here just to kind of play around with. The first one, I'm looking at if we are forced to go turn 1, which a lot of times we are because we have so many drops in Seraphon. There's not really any way to get to 1 drop that's viable. If we are forced to go turn 1, do not try to send these guys across because they can move 12, and in this list I'm putting in a Skink Priest and a Skink Star Priest. So you can get a run and charge with these guys if you get lucky and roll the 3 on his prayer. And if that were to happen, so you're gonna go your 12 inches, you're gonna auto run for a command point, another 6 inches, and now you've got your 6-inch charge to make. And they can run and still charge turn 1 if you get that prayer off. So we put the buff on from the Skink Star Priest with his staff. We got the buff for the Skink Priest on the run. You can add another +1 to their hits if you really want to, but we're gonna be a little starved for command points after this. Your Skink Chief here, so we'll end up doing a run for him too. Let's assume we get somewhere in the middle. Let's not auto run him 6 because that's probably not gonna happen. And we're gonna move our Stegodon up 8 just to see. We still want him to be able to shoot into these guys if we can. So on the charge, we're going to assume we make that charge and push all these guys in 6. If we're doing this strategy, we're for sure probably taking the +1 to run and charge to make sure we get that ability in. So we'll throw out the Bloat Toad, and hopefully this is one full unit of trolls, because if it's not, and you put your Bloat Toad here, you might be out of range of wholly within 6 inches of this entire unit. If it were 2 units, you're not going to get re-rolls for this Ripperdactyls, because if your Bloat Toad's here and you're tagging this unit here as your Bloat Toad re-rolls, your entire unit's not wholly within 6 of that unit. Let's assume this is all 1 unit so we get our re-rolls, because that would hopefully be good. Now we have to consider, are we still within range of this one? Wholly within 24? Yes, let's measure that again. Just barely, so you got to be careful of that one. Are we wholly within 18 of this one? Yes, so we could still get our prayers off there. So maybe in retrospect, we can alpha strike with these guys. We'll have to hit whatever screens they are. Most armies aren't going to have big giant elite units on the line, but let's assume that they did. We can successfully get off a charge. Now this all is dependent on the Skink Priest's staff going off, so your whole alpha strike is coming down to a 1 roll basically. So don't get that guy sniped, whatever happens. And we are using 1, 2, 3 command points for this. So you do have to have a Croak in the list and get at least an extra command point to make this work. If this happens, he's going to do 24 damage versus these trolls. Maybe, I guess it was upwards of 30. And they'll have a save where they'll save about 10 of them. So you'll do 20 damage or so and kill off, 4 of those guys? 5 of them? So you'll kill off most of the unit. The rest should battle shock. Unfortunately, you'll probably still lose a couple Ripperdactyls to their attack, and then probably a couple in battle shock, because this guy is for sure not going to be your general. So I think it is viable. It's kind of a long shot there. It does rely on that 1 roll. If you do get to go second, you can for sure get these guys in and keep all of your charges. I don't even have to move them up here. So you know what? Now that I'm I didn't grab them all. Now that I'm putting it on the table, it does rely on a couple things. Don't even have to move these guys up. They'll do the same thing here. I was putting these 2 different lists together just to show that you couldn't make the alpha strike. But once I put it on the table, you actually can. You do have to put a lot into them, but you can push them across the table and you can do some damage. Now the problem is going to be is if you run into any type of activation war stuff. If this were, Fire Slayers, Lumineth, Sylvaneth, Slanesh, the list goes on. Anybody that has activation war stuff, they'll fight first, and they will absolutely destroy these Ripperdactyls. They have a 5-up save. Nothing special after that. If your staff went off, they'd have a 4-up save. That would help some, especially in Coalesced. It would help some, keep them alive a little bit longer. But they will die quick. So don't send them at anything that has activation war stuff. Also, if you run into OBR, something that has rerollable saves, they're not gonna do anything. Those Mortek Guard. Let's see what we were doing against a 3-up save. We were doing. It would be a total of, you'd get 9 damage through Mortek Guard from that, and that's a lot to dedicate to get 9 Mortek Guard off the table. You're talking 3 command points. You're talking well over 600 points to get into that. So it is situational. I think it can do some work. So maybe I'm not completely dead on Ripperdactyls. I've changed my own mind seeing them on the table. I'm not going to rebuild and rebuy them because we can get better, or we can get that same damage for less effort in other things. So, all right, well, maybe have I changed your mind? Are Ripperdactyls still okay? I think on the table here, they turned out okay as long as somebody gives you a juicy target to go into, and you're willing to spend the points. Maybe they're still all right. If we did this in, I think we could do the same thing in Starborne. So if we're looking at the table and we're deep striking these guys, you're kind of at the limit of where you're hitting. I always like to be able to hit stuff that was covered up. So if they had a hero back here, old Ripperdactyls, you could line these guys up back here and deep strike and hit them. Now you're not gonna be able to do that. You've got to be 9 away. You're gonna be a lot more dependent on that 9 away. It's a lot easier to screen out. The old SHADOWSTRIKE was almost impossible to screen out. So I think this is the best way to use them. If you were taking this in Fangs, you get an extra 3 inches of movement, and maybe you wouldn't have to use the Skink Priest. If his staff failed, you might still have an option, because you'd have an extra 3 inches, and then you could still have your +1 to run. Well, you wouldn't be able to run. You'd still have your +1 to charge after that. But all right, that's the best I got for Ripperdactyls. I think they can still do a little bit of work. It is going to be a high skill unit. You've got to be able to keep those synergies. Use those command points. If Croak fails for you on the command points, and you only start with 2 command points, you might be in trouble. If the Skink staff fails, or that small 4-wound hero gets killed, then you're in trouble. But maybe it can still make it work. What do you think? Did I change your mind? I don't know. Poor Ripperdactyls. I used to love them. They were my favorite unit. Good old flappy boys. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Let's talk about some pterodons. And I think they're a little bit better. No, I know that they're better than Ripperdactyls. All right, see y'all tomorrow.